Seltzer Kings
podcasts.
In the military, veterans answer the call to serve. Now it's our turn. At Hire Heroes USA, they're changing lives, helping veterans and military spouses secure meaningful careers, all at no cost.
With over 100,000 success stories and counting nationwide, they're connecting skilled veterans with employers who recognize their true value. Visit hireheroesusa.org to access their services or to support their mission.
Real people making bold moves. Unforgettable journeys into life's next chapter. This is the Second Act Podcast.
Every day is a new chance. Mindset on a new path. Anything is possible. Any limit I surpass. Everything is in my grasp. I got tunnel vision with a pickaxe. Life is more fun when you live like there's no strings attached.
All right, welcome everyone back to the Second Act with Michael, not John today, who is out with the flu. Definitely lots of good things going on at the start of the year, but this time of year is prone to unexpected illnesses. So we're going to be navigating this conversation without Mr. Ballenger today, but I'm excited about our guest, who I will take no more time in waiting to introduce her. Today we welcome Jasmine Montupalli, founder and CEO of the Data Love Company, a woman-owned, veteran-owned, and minority-owned company on a mission to harness the power of data for meaningful social impact. With nearly 2 decades of experience in intelligence and data science across diverse industries, she has seen firsthand how effective data strategies can transform both organizations and communities. In addition to her leadership at the Data Love Company, Jasmine has served as a board member with the state of Colorado Department of Military and Veteran Affairs, advised the Minority Business Office under the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and held executive roles, including VP of Customer Experience at Gusto. Through every role, she brings a human-first perspective to analytics, translating complex numbers into actionable insights that drive real-world change. Jasmine currently resides in Colorado with her family, and I am super excited to learn more about her story today. Welcome to the show, Jasmine.
Thank you so much for having me.
How is everything going these days?
Very busy, very good. We are also battling a bit of illness in the Montupalli house as well, so tis the season for sure.
Tis the season, yes. We've had some bouts of that so far already, and hopefully we don't have another round, but it's hard when you have little ones and they bring things home from school, and then if you're out and about traveling or meeting with people, it just comes with the territory.
Absolutely.
Jasmine, we always like to sort of roll back time a little bit on where life began and, some of the things that started to sort of influence your thinking at a young age that lead you to where you are today. So why don't we start there and share a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, some important moments from your early family life, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So I was born in Houston, and my dad was actually a former professional football player. But by the time I came around, he was just dad. I don't think I even found out about that he had played professional football till I was something like 8 or 9. But I grew up in Houston. We moved to the East Coast to be closer to my mom's family, and in Philadelphia and South Jersey when I was 10. And so, yeah, growing up, I would say I really have fond memories of my childhood. I call my dad a feminist. He very much was like my person, and I say was because he's since passed away.
Okay.
But, he was my basketball coach, my softball coach. I was very nerdy and mathy as a child, and nobody in my family is mathy. I don't know where it came from, but he always just really encouraged it.
Yeah.
Even when I was, the only person that looked like me in the room. My mom was a school teacher, and
Okay.
so from that, I really kind of developed this love of learning. As a child, one of my favorite memories was, you play games, and one of my favorite games to play was school. And I would make tests for my friends, which I'm sure they didn't like, but I would make
Sounds
tests.
fun. Yeah.
with by hand, like, and I'm like, we're gonna learn, times tables and so, and so it just kind of was this very, I would say, just like normal childhood where I had a father that was just really supportive of me,
Uh-huh.
and where I had a mom that really valued learning and education. And so I think the two of those things together really gave me a lot of confidence to move in the world, even if I seem to kind of be on an island.
Yeah. So what grade did your mom teach, or did she teach multiple grades?
Yeah, when I was younger, she taught kindergarten,
Okay.
and I went to the same school that she taught kindergarten at, and she taught ESL, English as a Second Language class, and we were in Texas, right? So you had a lot of families where, the children were growing up in these multilingual homes, these bilingual homes. And so, yeah, she taught kindergarten, ESL. And then when we moved to Philly and South Jersey, she began teaching, I believe it was like third and fourth grade, I want to say, in
Okay.
in Camden, New Jersey.
And did your father's work bring you to those areas of the country as a football player?
And no, yeah, he by then he was just like a businessman. Like he just
Okay,
had
he
like
was
a
out of
boring.
football at that point. Okay.
Yeah, he had a boring desk job. He taught me how to use Excel, or whatever the first version of Excel was, like when I was a kid. And he taught me how to, like, he would have me do typing tests and stuff. Like, he's like, these skills are really important. You need to learn how to, you need to know how to use DOS and stuff, so,
Okay.
so like, so he was like, he had this like boring, boring desk job. But yeah, when he switched, he got a job out on the East Coast, and it was very close to my mom's family. And so we already
Oh,
had
nice.
a lot of
Okay.
foundations there. So we moved out that way. And that's where I grew up and went to high school in South Jersey. And then after graduating, went to West Point, which was just like 2.5 hours away. So
Yep.
sometimes felt like a world away. But yeah, that was my dad's very normal, boring dad job with spreadsheets and sales, and I don't know.
It's funny. I don't imagine many people like make that reconciliation between like a high energy pro football player to boring spreadsheet jockey, and like learning the mechanics of a number of things that, sit in front of a computer and master. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting transition.
If you know my family, it's not surprising. So if you think of like the stereotypical like scholarship athlete, you think like, oh, they're just gonna major in like basket weaving and try to go pro, and that was never the case. That's
Okay.
never been the case in my family. Pretty much none of us pay for college. We all get scholarships in some kind of way, shape, or form. A lot of athletic scholarships, a lot of that, in my family. But education is something that's really foundational and always has been. And so my dad still took he went to Rice University. He got a real degree. Like he was really serious about, he was already thinking about, because it just was instilled in his family, and he carried that on with me for sure. But it wasn't, you're gonna go pro and that's guaranteed, and you're gonna
Yeah.
have this like historic career and that's guaranteed, and that will carry you through life. So he always, I think, had, pun kind of intended, but I think he always had that second act in mind. And
Yeah. Eh,
the other thing to know about my father is that he is like family first. He was family first all the way.
Love that.
And so if it was, it was making sure that he could be there for all of our games. It was making sure that he could be present and we could play catch in the yard, that he could teach us how to ride bikes and teach us how to drive. And, what I mean? That was very much foundational for him. Like that, if he would have, trudged through the depths of hell if it meant that his family could be happy. And he was like everybody's all the cousins, he was like the favorite uncle. And, all the kids in the neighborhood would always come be at our house all the time. After he passed away, I I had a friend, my best friend growing up in Houston, reached out to me, and she essentially said that my dad was more of a father to her than
Hmm.
her own father was, and she was in a very abusive space, and she like found refuge in our home, and I just never really knew what was going on.
Yeah.
I just knew, oh, my house is a place all my friends want to be, and that's great. and we didn't grow up rich,
Yeah.
or anything like that. Just very kind of middle class to lower middle class, but it was still like our house was always full.
I mean, it just reinforces the idea that money doesn't bring happiness. It's being present, being a great girl dad, being supportive, putting
Yes.
family first. And it sounds like he was quite a planner as well, like thinking not just sort of in the short term, like here's the thing I'm doing, but what comes after that also plays into the whole putting family first. Football does have a shelf life, as a
Yes.
career, and he thought about that in a strategic way for you guys. And I love
Yeah.
hearing that you guys were an extended family for other families, which is awesome.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. My dad was it's interesting because my husband has a lot of the same qualities as my father did, and my family brings it up all the time. They say he'll just do something and, they'll be like, "That's like, you married your dad, right?" And I didn't realize it for years, and I'm like, "Oh, I guess I kind like, like my husband loves to grill and we're always out there. He's always out there like figuring out something to smoke and, or, some kind of new thing that he can put on the big green egg. And my dad he had this like one of those old barrel grills that was like 100 years old or something
Okay.
but he would just be out on the grill and people in the neighborhood, they just knew if they just walked by our house and they smelled it, they could just come right to the backyard. And he would always be grilling more than enough for everybody, so sometimes we would just end up with these, like, ad hoc 20-person cookouts in the backyard. So,
It sounds
yeah, it was
great. It sounds amazing. It kind of makes me want to come to one of your barbecues and
you gotta
hang
come,
out.
you gotta come. We throw it down.
It sounds awesome. And you mentioned going to West Point, and
Yeah.
coincidentally, when you and I talked offline, you happen to know one of our previous guests, I think through West Point, Ross Dickman,
Yeah.
who's the CEO of Hire
He's
Here.
my
So
class
he was
yeah,
your
he's my
classmate, right?
classmate. Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is just an incredibly small world. I don't think we had any idea about that sort of triangulation of things prior to us talking about it. But, he's doing some amazing things over at Hire Heroes USA, and we were thrilled to have him come on. And we've also been able to showcase some of the work that he's done with the client success stories coming out of that organization. But before we get more into sort of like that stuff that you're involved in today, so you had a great family life growing up. You were writing tests for your friends and having amazing barbecues. And then you went into a military institution for college. Tell us a little bit about that decision process and what influenced that.
Yeah. So the academy runs so West Point's the United States Military Academy. They run a summer kind of camp workshop thing. It's like a leadership, like an emerging leader type program where you can go and visit in the summer before your senior year and stay for, I think it's like it was at the time, it was like a week. And so I went and I just kind of fell in love with the place. I don't know if you've ever been there or seen pictures, but it is absolutely beautiful. And one thing about me is that I am kind of I like to be involved in a lot of different things, right? So I'm probably not going to be the best person on the track team or get like the absolute highest test score, but I did very well in school, academically, took my AP classes and all that. I was, captain the track team. I was on the basketball team, National Honor Society. I founded or was involved in a lot of clubs in my school, including like a respect club, creating a respectful environment club, which we
Okay.
founded after the Columbine shooting
Oh,
happened
yeah. Okay.
here in Colorado,
Yeah.
and just kind of really didn't want something like that to happen within our school. So that I was just involved in a lot of different things, and a lot of times I felt like I'm gonna have to like give up a lot of this stuff and just focus on my grades, or I'm gonna have to give up a lot of this stuff and just focus on sports or something. I kind of felt like that. And this was the first university, or this is the first institution I visited where it seemed like your ability to be well-rounded, your ability to juggle a lot of things, your ability to be more entrepreneurial in your thinking was actually something that was a plus. And so I added it to my list. It hadn't been on my list before, but they invited me. Like, one of my guidance counselors said, I think this would be really good for you. And I was like, meh. And I went and I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, this is, I would thrive. I would do well here. I think this feels good for me. And then 9/11 happened. I was applying and I was going to be applying to other schools and things like that. And 9/11 happened. I was in school at the time. And I can't remember if it was the week before then or the week after then, but I got early acceptance to
Okay.
West Point. Like, so they sit, there's like different rounds. You can get early acceptance, normal, like the normal acceptance, and then there's like wait lists, right? And so I'd gotten early acceptance, and I remember my family and all my friends are like, "Well, what are you going to do now?" Because, if you remember the news at that time, it was just like
Oh, yeah.
that was like the first time you knew, like, if I realize, I'm like, oh, if I'm going to West Point, I'll be in a war zone
Yep.
upon graduation. And so that made it kind of really real for me. And I think I was initially, when I was applying to West Point, candidly, I was not necessarily applying for the right reasons. I was like, oh, this is a very prestigious school. It's a full ride. It's like it's got, like, look at that pedigree. I was kind of like, look at all these people who've gone here.
Those are good. Those are good reasons. I mean,
Not
that's-
not but not for military service, they
sure,
were.
sure. Yeah, I hear you.
And so that was like a real turn. And I was 17, what do you know about life? Nothing. Like,
Wait,
you know what I mean?
you
Like,
might think you know a lot, but yeah, we looking
no,
back, like,
nothing.
what do
Looking back, I'm 40 now. I'm
yeah,
40 now,
yeah,
and I was like, what in yeah. And so I just didn't know it. And so after 9/11 happened, I was really kind of having, it was like one of these pivotal moments in my life where I realized that I wanted to serve my country.
hmm
And two, I realized that it's easy to say you're going to do this hard thing in, like, the good times. It's a lot more difficult to, like, your true character really shows in those kind of hard moments, like when stuff gets real.
Yep.
Was it July 1st, 2002? I went up to West Point for our day, and my parents dropped me off, and we were the first class to enter West Point after 9/11.
Okay.
And so, and my fun fact, my parents stayed around the whole day because they were like, we're not going to drive all the way home and then have to drive 2.5 hours back up to pick you up when you quit.
Yeah.
If you quit, because for me, I think and it wasn't like they thought I was going to quit because they thought I was weak or something. They thought I was going to quit because I'm very outspoken and, like, I speak my mind, and that was something my dad and my mom always were like, no, say the thing. Like, we were
Yeah.
say the thing,
How does that fit
and then
into, like, a rigid structure
it
and, formal
exactly.
yeah.
It doesn't, right? Like, it's and so they were just like, she's gonna say F this noise, and then we're gonna
Yeah,
have to dress. So they stayed around the whole day. They're like, if she makes it through the day, then we'll go home. And so
okay.
I made it through the
They were giving
day,
you a
and
day, okay.
they're
Yeah.
giving me a day. I made it through the day. I made it through the 4 years. My mom wrote me during, so you hear about basic training, and at West Point we call it Beast. It's
Okay.
called Beast Barracks, and it's like 6 weeks of a lot of intensity for somebody who has very little life experience. Like, it's a lot of yelling, it's a lot of push-ups, it's a lot of, it's a lot of, I mean,
Conditioning.
just conditioning. And my mom wrote me a letter, I think, every single day. She sent me some kind
Wow.
of mail, even when they were road tripping on like summer family vacation with my little sister and the family. I would get notes sometimes, like, written, like, on the back of, I don't know, like a piece of cardboard or something that she had
Yeah,
found. So if she didn't have paper, she would do that. She would send me little comics or
awesome.
lotto tickets and stuff like
Okay.
that.
Just yeah,
And yeah, I have like a crawl space, and I have a box, and I still have like a lot of those letters.
awesome.
My friends gifted me with a journal, and they all wrote letters. I still have it. It's on my shelf over here. But they all wrote notes to me on a page so that I could have something to, like, read. It was like all motivational notes from from my friends and family members and things like that. And so I still have it. It's like one of my favorite things. But a lot of it was like that support, I think, was really important for getting me through the hard times, you know?
Do you think not having those things would have significantly changed the experience you had going through West Point?
I think so. One thing I say a lot of time is like build a ride or die team. If there are people that are in your sphere that are not adding value to your life and you're not adding value to theirs, then that's maybe not a relationship that you want to foster.
Mhm.
And so my best friend, we lived down the street from each other growing up when I moved to the East Coast, and she was like one of the first friends I made, and we've been friends for over 30 years now. You
That's
know, like
awesome.
my husband, we actually lived next door to each other as cadets at West Point, and
Oh,
that's when
wow.
we met. And we were friends, very, very good friends for 11 years before we started dating. So I'm very much a person that thrives on the importance of like relationships, and I try to keep people in my world that have my back.
Yeah. And not to put a plug in here for what we're doing, but that's the whole concept behind the second act, is to build a community of people who are trying to help each other out, think through life, think through, it could be something on a personal level, it could be career related, it can be something aspirational. And that's why we
Yeah.
have such incredible guests come on and share their stories. One, to let people know, people from all different backgrounds with all different experiences share a core set of values, and they're good values. And when you can curate that in some way, put the good out into the world, I think it's one of those things that's sort of transcendent. When you die, it doesn't die, is really
Absolutely.
the way I think about that. And, so you had an incredible dad who put family first, your mom who's writing you letters to give you support and motivation through this really hard experience to begin with, going to West Point and making it through that. But on top of that, you have the 9/11 event. And I recently sat through a really interesting conversation about all these different generations and the things that have impacted their thinking, anything from technology to geopolitical events to things happening in their country that are important topics for that time and place. All of these things really shape how we think and act, and then what we put out into the world. And so you make it through West Point successfully, and then tell us a little bit about your military career and how that led into technology.
Yeah. So I did major in operations research, which, if you're not familiar, is a very nerdy major. It's like math sciences and systems engineering combined. It was kind of this precursor to what we now call data science. And so, yeah, I mean, I graduated May of 2006, and I was in Iraq by I commissioned as a military intelligence officer, and I was in Iraq and Mosul by November of 2007. This was during the surge, so it was a 15-month tour, and that meant missing 2 Thanksgivings, 2 Christmases, 2 New Years. Coming back from that, it was almost like it's like you miss like, it's just
Yeah.
like it's like coming back almost to just a different world, it felt like. But yeah, I mean, during that I was 23 at the time. I got to spend the first half of the tour really doing, like, action-focused intel work. I was working hostage recovery.
Oh, wow.
I was yeah, lots of, redirection of assets, a lot of doing, like, very quick turn analyses and doing predictive things based on human behavior,
Oh,
which I had a
interesting.
knack for, I realized. And I mean, I was 23, I was a second lieutenant. I did get my first promotion while I was there to a first lieutenant, so I
Okay.
went from butter bar. And I remember it was very interesting because I was kind of in a space that was supposed to be a captain's job, which was essentially 2 ranks above where I was. And so that's where I first realized I'm like, oh, I'm pretty good at this, like prediction stuff and like human behavioral things. And so coming back from that tour, then I went to Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos. That's when I deployed to Iraq. Out of that, came back, I got stationed at Fort Bliss, and I took command of a headquarters company while I was there ahead of our deployment to Afghanistan.
Okay.
And so that was interesting because at the time, women weren't technically allowed in combat roles. And so I was in command of a headquarters company that was quite large, something like 200 soldiers, which is very large for an army company. And about 2 weeks before I'm getting on a plane, my first sergeant, who's like my right hand non-commissioned officer, he's one of my best friends this day.
Yeah.
And he just goes, "Hey, ma'am, we've got a change of mission. We're going to be owning battle space." And I thought he was joking because I'm an intelligence officer and we're in an infantry unit. Like we're in an infantry unit, but
Yeah.
I'm an intelligence officer. I'm not an infantryman, obviously. Wasn't allowed to be an infantryman at the time. And so I think he's joking, and it took an absurd amount of time for me to realize that he was not, in fact, joking. Part of my unit was already deployed forward. I'm like, how am I supposed to do this?
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and so they essentially they my company was augmented with an infantry platoon, and then we were asked to build the rest out of hide. So out of hide meaning my company's headquarters. So we've got like the logistics stuff. I've got cooks, I've got mechanics, I've got some medics, I've got chemos, I've got, it's a very diverse company. Oh, and then I've got staff, right?
Okay.
And so essentially that's what we had to do. We had to kind of reform the team on the fly, train up, and get ready to do infantry things. And
What's that period of time where you learn
chaos.
about this and you have to basically like force a paradigm shift in your way of
Yeah,
thinking and operating? Like, what is that like time
hard.
frame?
It was
It's
hard.
hard
It
for
was
sure.
Yeah, and so this has come to be one of another pivotal moment in my life, which is I was the only woman commander in the entire brigade. So
Oh
32
my gosh.
commanders, I'm the only woman. Even the other kind of like the intelligence company commander was a man even. So every single other company commander is a man, and most of them are infantrymen.
Okay.
Right? And so I'm essentially looking around to know how to behave, kind of. I'm like, okay. And I started doing that, and this is the pivotal moment, is the moment I realized that was a mistake, because I realized I don't need to lead the way they're leading. I need to lead the way Jasmine leads. And it's one of the first times where I stopped looking at my differences and my otherness as a weakness.
Mhm.
So the fact that I was a woman, the fact that I was Black, the fact that I was an intelligence officer, even though all of those things were very different from my peers, it didn't mean that otherness was a weakness. In fact, they were a strength. It took me a while to realize it, and it was actually my brigade commander who kind of gave me a dressing down and was like, "You need to figure out what you're doing." It was very early on in the deployment, and I was like, and I really took stock of that. He didn't tell me what to do. He just told me, "You need to, like, get it together." And so
As a source of like empowerment to you, like, hey, like you're in charge. Get like
yeah,
help me understand that a little bit.
yeah, I mean, this was a bit of a personality thing to understand about that particular colonel, which was, if he is on your butt, he cares. If
Okay.
he's on your butt, he sees something in you.
Nice.
If I would see him sometimes, like, just not engage with commanders that made mistakes or something like that, and I realized, oh, I'm like, "Oh, like, he doesn't have faith that that person, anything he's gonna say that is gonna make a change." So, when he was on me about that, I took stock, and I'm like, "Okay, we need to pivot again," and so went back to the drawing board, and we were able to do things. I realized we were able to do things and navigate in spaces that my male counterparts were just not able to do. So you're missing out as an intelligence officer if you only have access to one small portion of the population. You are missing out on a huge part of the picture, because in many societies, including in Afghanistan, even if women are not at the forefront, they are still very foundational to the ecosystem.
Yes.
There's strength in that, and there's knowledge there. And so if you really wanna know what's going on, if you can speak with the women, which my counterparts really couldn't, I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we could speak with the children. And I was one of the only units that had women just all throughout because of the type of specialties that I had in my unit. And so one of the ways that we also made a shift was traditionally when you have a female engagement team, they're seen as like an enablement kind of capability. So you only bring them out when you need them. And you only need them if you're doing some kind of a search or something like that and a woman needs to be searched. Then you bring them up and then the women take it. And so what we did was we said, like, that's such a waste of an asset and we're missing out on a lot of information because the women are too afraid to engage. The children are too afraid to engage. And so what we started doing was I just and the thing is, the men and the women both in my unit were amazing, but the women were I had some exceptional women in my unit who were good leaders. Am I just not going to make this staff sergeant who's amazing and beloved by her colleagues? Am I just not going to put her into a leadership position because she's a woman? Like that seemed insane to me. So we just fully integrated. Like if you
Nice.
were an awesome medic, then you were the medic in that platoon. If you were an awesome, you know what I mean? Like you were the best person for the job, that's the job you got. And that made a fully integrated organization before the time, like, now that's just kind of, it's a lot more
Standard
prevalent.
operating procedure. Yeah.
Right. And so that led to so much intel that led to us having a better understanding of the battlefield. It allowed us to do women's empowerment initiatives, education initiatives. I began and by having that information, I was able to take that information and it led to transformation. So we were able to do economic development initiatives. I was able to engage with local village elders and get a lot of engagement with their agriculture industry that was very prevalent where we were. There's a lot of farming community. I was able to help with some of the flooding that they were blaming it on the soldiers coming in because the soldiers coming in just happened to lead to this, not lead to, but it correlated, but correlation isn't causation, but it's hard to explain that to the farmer who's like 90% of his crops getting washed away by these 100-year rains. And so in engaging in that way, as kind of showing up as Jasmine as a leader, Jasmine as an intelligence officer, Jasmine as a problem solver, I was really able to have a lot more impact than I would have been if I was trying to pretend to be an infantryman, because I wasn't an infantryman. I was never going to be an infantryman. you know.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
It's tourney time, and with FanDuel's Dog of the Day, you can get a daily profit boost during the College Conference Championships to bet on any underdog. So get ready to celebrate some upsets.
No one saw that coming, except for me, baby!
21 plus in present in select states. Opt-in required. Minimum plus 100 odds required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable profit boost tokens. Restrictions apply, including token expiration and max wager amount. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
So the colonel who is up in your business said, let's get going, figure this out, basically ignited you to leverage your distinct advantages based on your experience as an intelligence officer to do these things that probably no one else could have done because of who you are and what your skills were. And it led to some incredible outcomes.
Yeah, and we ended up doing more patrols than all of our counterparts, and most everything that we had to do was dismounted because of the way that the terrain was. So, we did hundreds of patrols. We had like quantifiable impact. We were able to take a lot of dangerous homemade explosives off of the battlefield. We were able to get arrest warrants in
Okay.
collaboration with our local Afghan forces for the entire winter command team for the Taliban, and take them off of the battlefield and get them. They were arrested for essentially planning and getting prepared for the spring offensive. And so if you know anything about that ecosystem, like being able to disrupt that winter team can really essentially disrupt an entire year's worth of efforts on on the part of the Taliban.
Okay.
And so
Interesting.
it was really it was, I mean, it was kind of this very pivotal moment that happened very early on, and I'm grateful. I don't have ego about much of anything. Like if when there's criticism, especially if it's constructive, I take that in and see what I can do better.
Okay.
And a year later, we got back, and that same colonel recommended me for the MacArthur Leadership Award, which I
Oh,
did
nice.
win. He's up here. I don't know if you
Okay.
can see him.
I
Hold on.
don't. I think he's out. It's out of the shot, but that's amazing.
Can
Oh,
you
that's
see?
amazing.
Yeah. Weighs
Awesome.
16 pounds, and it's like it's something. It's there at the time there were 28,000 company grade officers in the Army, and each year that award goes to about like 12 or 13. So
Out of
it was.
28,000. That's
Mhm.
incredible achievement.
Yeah. Yeah, so to go from him kind of chewing my butt and telling me I need to get my stuff together, like, I know that, and I tell this story, like, I got to go back and teach at West Point from 2014 to 2018, and I tell this story to my students, my cadets, when I'm having conversations about responsibility, and I was like, I just tell the story, I don't give any of my opinion on it, and then
Yeah.
inevitably, they'd be like, "It's not fair, you only had 2 weeks to prepare, dude, like, what does he expect you to do?" And it was like that
Yeah.
kinda
Yeah.
stuff. I was like, he expected me to lead. He
Mhm.
expected me to figure it out. He expected me to be in charge because I was in charge, and he expected me to take responsibility because that's what we do as officers. We take responsibility for everything that our unit does or fails to do. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. And I use this as a lesson because it was a lesson for me in responsibility. I'm grateful to him every day. I'm still Facebook friends with him and his wife on,
Nice.
like I still keep in touch with what he's doing, all the awesome things that he's doing. So yeah.
But what you said, Jasmine, is so important about it, and I've experienced this myself with certain people along my life journey, is if they are providing constructive criticism or getting all up in your business about this or that, it is because they care. If people don't care, you're not going to get anything. So it might suck at the time that it's happening, but looking back in every case, it's been like, damn, I hated it in the moment, but I've learned from that moment and carried some of that forward. And it's
Yeah.
probably incumbent upon us to get up in some people's business once in a while and give them a little motivation and a kick in the pants to show them that we care. So it sort of culminates with this incredible award that very few people get. And I want to be conscious of time and I want to get to the
Oh,
rest of
yeah.
your story. So how do we get from that into or out of the military and into the tech sphere?
Yeah, like I said, I got to go back and teach at West Point and do some research. I went to Georgia Tech, got my master's,
Nice.
which
Go
made me a little bit,
Jackets. Go Jackets.
made me a little bit more technical. And then I finished out my career at the Pentagon. And while I'd had my son by then, and I was just kind of looking ahead, and I was like, ah, all my cool stuff that I got to do I was kind of like, it's kind of behind me now, right? I wasn't looking forward to anything. And it was very odd because it's 13 years that they expect you to stay in for the 20. It's
Okay.
very odd to leave at 13 years. And
Okay.
so, and I'd been through a lot by then. I didn't mention this, but I was wounded in Afghanistan. And
Oh
so
my gosh.
so 10 days in hospital, and then 4 months of occupational therapy. So
Oh my
between
gosh.
that and then having my little baby Rama, who's 6, my body had been through a
Yeah.
lot, and my mind had been through a lot, my heart had been through a lot, and I just kind of was ready for finding a new purpose. I was kind of like feeling like it's time to give away my Legos and go do something else. And so I found my way to the Breakline program, which aims to increase diversity in the tech industry, and their
Okay.
foundational vertical was veterans. And so
Okay.
I went through that program, and it was just a really wonderful experience. I'm still friends with the CEO of Breakline to this day. And yeah, I found my way to Gusto, which is this financial tech
Yes.
company. And I'm like, I don't know anything about fintech finance, or I don't know, like, how am I going to go? And so I go into this, at the time, it's like startup life, right? And so you don't have any roles, like, there's no role title. Like, I got hired onto a team, and they're like, yeah, just like figure out
Here's
how to
some
make an
stuff
impact.
to figure out. Yeah.
We've never hired anybody like you before. We've never hired anybody this technical for like this team, because it was in the customer experience space. But I realized very quickly that my background in like behavioral human stuff and technical stuff really came together quite beautifully. And so we were able to do a lot of really innovative things there. And I was about 5 months in, I was asked, hey, like, you know what you're doing? Can you build that out as a capability? And so that's what we did. So I was there for almost 4 years, and built this capability, this kind of customer intelligence capability from the ground up. It would start out just me. And by the time I left, I think my team was 16 on the data side. And then I had like technical program managers and stuff like that too. And then we have 3 patents pending from that customer intelligence
Oh, wow.
work. Just based on like being able to be very innovative about proactive, guided, and opinionated service. And again, about almost 4 years in, I realized I felt like, you know what? I feel like my work here is done. I need to give away my Legos and allow those that, because when you hire your bench. Like you should hire your replacement.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's what I did. I had hired who I felt were kind of my bench first. And so about almost 4 years in, I was like, it's time for me to hand things over to you, and you can build something better than what I built. And so
Yep.
that's when I left, and I wanted to spend a lot more time on some of my volunteer work. I spent some time doing a lot of pro bono work for nonprofits.
Okay.
I'm really helping them be more data driven. I did some consulting stuff, and then I realized, I'm like, oh, I could make this a lot more inexpensive if I start building this out as like a product. And so that's kind of, so it's the Data Love Co. We
Yeah.
say where data meets heart, and we're really working to make social impact a bit more data driven. And so that's what we've been doing. I also have since started my PhD at the University of Denver, and I am focusing on the role of emerging technology and its ability to create equity. And I've been engaging with some different Colorado organizations and agencies, state and local government agencies, to try and collaborate on some of that work. And I really think it could be a beautiful intersection between, academia and theory, practical application, and then impact to influence just the way that we support our communities.
Yeah. That's a beautiful goal to have. And I heard a deep breath in there as you started to mention, I guess, generally speaking, the nature of a startup, if you will.
Oh my
And
gosh.
and trying to start something new. This is the second act. So whatever that is, if it's a business, and you are both the CEO and the janitor, doing all the things, from business development to operations to sales and marketing to building the
Yes,
product to doing all the things, and it's exhausting at times. I
exhausting.
have taken my own deep breaths like that before, but it's very rewarding, especially as you mentioned. There's a strong purpose behind what you're doing, and when you can find a community of partners to help you in that journey, or other people who are starting something new. Some days it's just a vent. Other days, like, to figure stuff out. It's like all the things. But when did you start the Data Love companies?
So I technically started it in spring of 2023, but I wasn't really doing much with it. Like I said, I was taking some time to. So I just started as like an LLC for some of my consulting work and things like that. I just didn't really have a vision for it. That's evolved over time. But we recently, in December, just incorporated as a C corp.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
as we've gotten into product development, we're in a couple of accelerators. We're with Bank of America's Breakthrough Lab, as
Awesome.
well as today, we're starting with Bunker Labs Veterans and Residents Program.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so we've gotten some grant funding, and we've got some great partnerships with nonprofits that are really passionate about this work. We're focusing on the food security space first.
Okay. It's a good one.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of good data, a lot of organizations that could do more with their data, and by that, really help to inform like food policy, things like that. So we're really trying to get into that ecosystem, and like I said, we've got some really good partnerships and some grant funding to build. I've got my dev team working right now on the minimum viable product MVP,
Okay.
and so we're like just full steam ahead right now.
That's awesome. I don't know what your experience is like working with public sector data, government data, but mine has been a varied experience depending on the jurisdiction and government entity in terms of how accessible and modern and usable some of that data is, and
Yeah.
how fresh it is. So, but you're saying from a food security perspective, the data landscape happens to be pretty
It's
good?
actually one of the theories that I had that's proving to be true is that nonprofits and public benefit corporations really serve as they're filling a gap. They're filling a gap that the government is unable to fill. So,
Okay.
because if the government was able to fill all gaps, then nobody would ever be hungry, nobody would be home insecure, everybody would have access to healthcare when they need it. They would have, you know what I mean? Like we wouldn't have a housing crisis, right? So, there are these organizations that pop up, and these are social determinants of health, right? Like your education, your ability to have good food, your ability to have housing, your ability to have healthcare.
Employment is another
Employment
element. Yep.
employment, right? And there are these organizations that are in the form of nonprofits, and they have really great data on that. They are where the rubber meets the road, and so they understand what the ecosystem is for food security in Denver, for
Okay.
example, because they're the ones serving that population and that data exists. And so really what we're trying to do is create an ecosystem that has data-driven feedback loops,
Okay.
and we're trying to make that easier. That process should not be as difficult as it is right now because it's extremely expensive for the nonprofit. Very few nonprofits or PBCs have like fully staffed data teams as you would see in a tech company. And my experience, I've been able to go in and kind of be an army of one. I can do more with less. I understand what it's like to be under-resourced and over-leveraged. And so my goal is really to really close that data divide that exists between the like for-profit sector and the mission-driven sector, because that data is truly valuable and it potentially world-changing.
So is the goal to help them be as efficient as possible with the revenue or capital that they have so that they're getting the most bang for their buck for everything that is taken in and then put out into society?
That would be one byproduct, but when we think about, let's just use the food security space because that's really where we're focusing first. But when you're thinking about nonprofits, yes, potentially they've got grants incoming or donors, things like that.
Hmm.
But they also have potentially state and local government agencies asking them for insights, or they have maybe a larger nonprofit that's more national. If you've got like a nonprofit that's more local, there may be use for
Interesting.
those insights that they have. And so right now that ecosystem doesn't really exist easily. And also, let's say that there are some indicators of, say, spikes at a shelter or a food pantry, or, these are things that you potentially can predict and then put a plan together ahead of time to get ahead of it. Again, one of my philosophies has always been that any kind of service should not be reactive. It should be proactive, guided,
Yeah.
and opinionated. And the way that you do that is with data insights. But that takes
Nice.
pulling together sources of data, multiple sources of data, making sense of it, making sure that it's managed properly, making sure that you can actually derive insights from that data. And so that's really where we are. We're building a data management tool, an analytics tool, specifically for these industries that focus on social determinants of health.
That's awesome. Really cool stuff, Jasmine. As we round out time here, we always like to ask our guests the final question, which is if you were to leave anybody who's contemplating or just getting started on their second act, whatever that is, what advice, since you've had quite, some interesting pivots in your life, what advice can you share with them, some practical advice or tips that would help them?
My first piece of advice would be that relationships matter. You need to be able to bring people along. You need to be able to surround yourself with your ride or dies, making sure that, you build that community if it doesn't exist for you. The other thing I'd say more broadly is if you're contemplating a second act, or in my case, like a third or a fourth, maybe, then really embrace that intersection of curiosity and courage. It's really not just about
Nice.
doing something new. It's about staying curious enough to learn. Even if you are a beginner in the space, right? Even if you're not familiar, just stay curious and bet on yourself. I mean, I've pivoted so many times, even just in this startup world. And so, let alone going from the military to tech to Data Love Co. and then back into academia. Like I've pivoted a lot, but even just with the Data Love Co., I have pivoted multiple times to get where I am, and I probably will pivot again. And so I'll just say, stay curious, stay courageous. Don't be afraid to pivot, rewrite the script, fail fast, pick yourself up, and give yourself grace in those hard moments.
I love it. Fantastic. Fantastic parting advice. And for anybody who wants maybe some more advice or to just learn more about the Data Love Company or you, what's the best way for anybody to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my website, dataLoveco.com, DATALOVECO.com, is up. We're going through a rebrand right now as we move kind of from consulting into like a tech product, but there's an ability to reach out to me via the website. There's also a scheduling link on my website for anybody that would like to set up a quick chat or consultation. And yeah, I'm also up on LinkedIn and socials, Data Love Co. So please don't hesitate to engage with us. We're always looking to learn. We're always looking for potential partners or anybody interested in this work. It's going to be a team effort for sure.
Awesome. Incredible story, Jasmine. I loved hearing it. I feel like I know you a little bit better now, so thank you for sharing that with me and certainly for our audience who I know will enjoy. And yeah, I think we're gonna call it a day here and wrap things up. But thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All
This
right,
was
thanks,
great.
Jasmine. Yeah, this was awesome. Till next time, see ya.
The Second Act with Michael and John stars Michael Newborn and John Ballenger. The podcast is produced by Seltzer Kings. For more information on the show, check out michaelandjohn.com, or if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, give the guys a shout on their socials at The Second Act Movement on most platforms. Thanks for listening.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.